Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Daybreak by CMYK Games. Daybreak is a 1 to 4 player solo or cooperative game in which you are trying to achieve environmental balance before time runs out and it's too late. Across the game, you're going to have 6 rounds. 6 rounds that are tracked on the board over here, and in each round you're going to go through 5 steps. You're going to go through a global phase, a local phase, emissions, crisis, and growth. None of those have any meaning to you yet, but we'll get into all of them very shortly. But the general idea before we get into it too much detail is this is one of those games where you're trying to do all the good things as the game does all the bad things, and you're trying to make sure that the good things you do can eventually outpace the bad things, in this case climate catastrophes, before time runs out. To that end, you're going to start with the global phase each round. Each round you're going to have the global phase tracked on this player card. We're going to add crisis cards and start a global project. We're going to put out crisis cards, the first one being face up, and then these next 2 are going to be face down. Now, as the game progresses, as you start raising the temperature of the planet, you might start adding more crisis cards, which are tracked over here, as many as 5 crisis cards before you just lose the game from one of the end game conditions. But right now, we start with 3. You always set the first one face up, and the next ones are face down. Then we're going to start a global project. We're going to choose 2 global projects, and the players are going to choose which one they think is more beneficial to us before adding that global project. So for example, in this case, we will take tax haven regulations, which will potentially give us the opportunity to draw an extra card every single round. These global projects can be very helpful. You do have to pay into them, but once you get them, they can give you a lot of ways and tools at your disposal to try to power past all the bad things in the game. Now, it's worth noting, you can only have 4 global projects, as opposed to this little infinite symbol over here, where you can keep adding past the 4 over here, which you go to 5. But on this side, you are limited to 4. So once you hit round 5, as you add a global project, you would have to get rid of a previously existing one to add a new one to the game. That is phase 1, that is our global phase. In the local phase, we're going to, on this player a card over here, we're going to draw 5 local project cards, and we're going to start taking actions with those cards, each player managing their own personal area. In the game, you are running as one of the various nations of the world, and you're going to start with your own 5 unique projects. So for example, I'm playing right now as the majority world. This is a regular card back, this is one of my 5 starting cards, and these are our projects in the game. Now, the way you manage your projects in the game is you're basically doing one of 3 things with these cards. You're either taking the card over here and you're placing it on top of a previously existing card, keeping the previous icons in play, and that will help you take stronger actions that need certain icons in the game. In this case, actually, this grid enhancing tech will be better served placing over our clean electricity, or possibly our second action is tucking the card under a previously existing project to add those icons to that project. The third way to use a card, and you can see this already on many of these symbols we have over here, is you can discard cards to take the benefit of these various actions. So sometimes you need to use cards as a currency. So everything in your hand represents either a new possible project you're playing, supporting a previous project, or just discarding it entirely in order to take an action on a card. You're going to look at your 5 cards and try to figure out the best combination of things that you're doing in this game to try to drive progress home faster and better for you. To that end, let's come back to this project stage soon, but let's show you what the remaining stages look like so that you can see what it is you're trying to do with what ideal results. Which brings us to step 3, which is emissions. In emissions, you're going to check your energy demand first. Right now, our energy demand is 10, and we currently supply that with 8 dirty energy and 2 clean energy. Clean energy is very good. It's going to help sustain our needs without having a penalty. Dirty energy is important. You do need energy in the game, or else you'll have communities in crisis. We'll get back to that. But they do come with the downside of the emissions they add, which is part of how you're going to slowly lose the game if you're not careful. But right now, we're just checking if our demand is met, not checking the consequences of how we met that demand. In step 2, you're going to add the carbon to recent emissions. So you're going to have this area of the board over here where you add various emissions as you go through the game, but the basic idea is you're going to look at your personal player board over here. You're going to add up the emissions you have from your dirty energy, plus emissions from other categories such as vehicles, buildings, agriculture, all of that. You're going to sum those totals, so 17 here, 8 over here, and that's going to be 25 dirty energy, there's 25 emissions that we're going to add to the emissions box. And if 25 seems like a high number, it is. Hopefully, if you play your cards right, you'll be able to get that number a little bit down before you get to that first end of round, but it is still going to be a lot. The good news is you can now sequester some of your emissions. Effectively, we have oceans, we have trees, we have things that will absorb some of those emissions, but probably not all. In fact, certainly not all, at least not yet. Right now, you're going to start the game, and this is all going to be variable player by player count. I have this set up as a solo game right now, but we have 6 trees and 4 oceans. They are nicely spread out for the visual aspect, but if you just want the ease of use, you can just put them all in one clumped area. So we have 10, 5, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, for a total of 10 sequestered emissions. So those 25 emissions I just added to the board, you'd reduce that by 10, putting it back away, and then the remaining 15 has to go to add to global temperature. To that end, we're going to go ahead and grab our 15, and because we're playing a solo game, we only are going to be utilizing that first column. For each player, you add one more column. We're going to put 5 cubes over there, 5 cubes over here, and then 5 cubes over here. These, by the way, are just the giant stand-ins for having 5 cubes. In general, as you add cubes, you add 1, 2, 3, 4, and then replace it with a 5th cube over here, and that's going to be 3 full bands of temperature increase in the game that we have to deal with. Because when you're done doing that, for each of these over here, you're going to replace it with a temperature band that's going to make your life significantly worse in the game. We're going to replace that, and replace that. We are adding up our bands as we go. Please note that if you have a partial band, so let's say we had only had 14, for example, then we would take 4 cubes instead, and we'd put that over here. But unless you have a full 5, and it's 5 per player, unless you have a full 5 per player, you don't replace it with a band yet. So in this hypothetical right now, at the end of the round, which would not be a crazy end of round, we currently added 14 emissions to the game, which resulted in 2 full bands, plus a partial band, which before we get to the crisis stage. In the crisis stage, and that is phase 4. In the crisis stage, you're going to go ahead and resolve planetary effects and resolve crisis cards. So over here, we're going to go ahead and roll the die for each band you have in play. So right now, for example, we have 2 bands. We're going to roll this die over here twice, and we're going to add up various tracks. So we move up on the desertification track over here, and we roll it again, and we're going to move up over here on permafrost. Now, whenever you hit one of these symbols, as we just did over here, you're going to look and do whatever it is that it wants you to do over here. So for example, we're going to add more cubes to this track over here. And different effects have different symbols over here of different ways you add up, but sometimes you can roll a few times and have nothing happen until you get to the end. Other times you have things happening right away as you hit certain effects on these different areas of the board. When you're done with that, you're going to resolve the planetary crisis cards. You're going to resolve the crisis cards. You're going to look at the face-up one and resolve this one, whatever it has. In this case, we're going to be adding communities in crisis per temperature band. So we have 2 temperature bands, and it means we're going to add 2 communities in crisis, but we're going to reduce it by our ecological impact of each player. So right now, over here, I can look at this and say I'm adding 2, but I'm reducing it by 1, so I'm going to add 1 community in crisis to my personal player board, which may not seem bad because you have to get to the end until you lose the game. Again, one of the many lose conditions in the game, running out of time, running up over here too many cards, and then over here running too much temperature bands, and then over here getting too many communities in crisis. So over here we just added 1, but now we'll be drawing 1 less card at the start of each round, and since the cards are everything in this game, we have to be very careful at managing our communities in crisis. It's not just a way to lose, it's also a way to slow you down in the game. But then you're going to go ahead and flip the remaining over and resolving those one at a time as well. So each of these things, you're going to have them. There are sometimes ways to peek at them, but usually you are going to be blindsided by some of the effects of all the bad things happening in the world. Of all the emissions you're slowly adding, those are slowly going to have an ongoing negative effect for you. Now the last phase is growth, but we can come back to the earlier phase. So now that you have a general idea of the cycle is generally going to be the global phase, where you add these cards, but we don't yet know half of them, where you add a global project. Then from there into local phase, where you're going to draw your hand of cards and start using those cards to take actions. Now you understand what it is you're trying to do. The main thing you're trying to do is to convert your dirty energy to clean energy, being mindful that your energy needs are going to go up each round as you play, but also trying to get rid of your emissions and possibly adding more forests or more oceans to the board to go ahead and sequester more emissions. You're trying to achieve this balance effectively in the game where you're able to build up your engine, your cards, and do more better things as you go through it. And that's going to come through a variety of ways, but mostly the abilities on these projects or the abilities on projects in your hand. So for example, I might over here as my first action, I might go ahead and discard a card and then take this action where I can add 1 for one of these for each of the symbols I have. In this case, knowing that this was coming, I would have gone ahead and added that single one over there in order to lower the amount of communities in crisis I would have had to add. That is perfect knowledge I did have that I could have stopped. I then then can go ahead and add this to the board, placing it over that card, and benefiting from the fact that this says if I have 2 to 3 of that symbol, I can go ahead and draw a card. So I can now activate this card to draw a card. Each card on it can be activated multiple times unless it has a limit. In this case, this limit is once per round, I can use this ability. And that's going to be a big part of the game, is you're going to often be using the abilities of cards and then directly covering those cards to use the ability of the next card, because you can, you're not limited to one action per column, you're limited to whatever the cards say, which means there's a lot of using, replacing, and using, replacing, while also managing the reinforcing to get more done. So right now we add this other card to our hand, and then if we play this, we can go ahead again, play this directly over that. I probably wouldn't do it exactly there, but hypothetically, and then we can draw 9 cards, keeping all cards that have those 2 tags. And so effectively the main game you're playing over here, the main action phase, is trying to utilize the cards you have in order to place them underneath cards to support them, on top of them to add new actions, or just discarding them to do the various effects that the cards have, all catered around ways to increase your energy, reduce your dirty energy, to reduce various emissions, to add more card draw. All of these little puzzles just trying to build your own little way to fight back against the constant emissions you are producing, and trying to balance that around the planet's needs in order to effectively reach drawdown. That's where we get to phase 5 over here. Phase 5 is going to be checking for victory, because there's a concept in the game called drawdown. Over here in this area, you're going to check for drawdown. Drawdown is when the amount of emissions you've added is less than the amount you are actually absorbing. As long as you have more areas of trees and water that can absorb emissions, and you are not even adding those emissions. So for example, if you would be consuming 14 emissions, but you're only actually even adding 10 to the board, that means you've achieved balance in the game. You would then take the remaining emissions from this track, actually reducing that track, and then you have to survive the last crisis phase, and that's all you need to do to win. That'll be the checking for victory. Then you advance the round marker, and you increase energy demand by 2. Well, again, everything's going to be different. Different factions of the world, different countries of the world have different amounts of their energy production increasing each round, but you are going to have to manage that. And then you repeat the cycle, moving to the next round, and continuing to try to build your tableau better and faster than all the bad things being thrown at you by the ecological imbalance. And that is basically how you play Daybreak, which means it's time for my review of what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like. And the main thing to like about Daybreak is cards, cards, and more cards. There's multiple decks of cards you're playing with, one of which I haven't even talked about yet, but you're going to have the global projects over here. That's this full stack over here of all these different ways that you have something else that you can do on a global scale, affecting yourself and the other players, giving you something better, some way to manage the constant crisis, and all of these are going to be vastly different, and you have 2 to pick from every round, which across the course of the game is going to give you different competitive advantages to manage. The flip side is you have this entire stack over here of the unknown crises you're going to be affecting, you're going to be dealing with every single round, and again, this is a giant pile of crises, all with different effects that you have to manage, that will be thrown at you with different ways to mitigate or just be surprised by across the course of the game. But then, the best deck of cards is going to be the main deck of project cards. Each nation starts with their own unique 5 project cards, but then they're generally guided to give you some degree of different things to do, ways to reduce your dirty energy, ways to add energy, to draw cards. It's a little mix of everything in the mix, but then you can start adding cards to them, putting your own project cards on top of them in order to get this giant smorgasbord of abilities. And by the way, all of these cards have a little QR code on them, so if you ever have a question, every single one of these cards has a link you can go to that both defines what the card does for in case the iconography is not enough, or if you need further clarification, but also to give you some background, thematic background to the card as well. So this is very much an educational game as well as a mechanically satisfying puzzle as you go through them. Again, every single card has a QR code you can scan, which some players may not like that. I find it very unobtrusive and not in your way, and very useful for when you have that one card where you're like, I don't fully understand exactly what this card is doing. But the giant variety of cards is going to be the core puzzle of here, trying to figure out how to draw into the right cards, getting more card draw in the game, more ways to manage your energy, more ways to improve your energy, more ways to remove various emissions, and just trying to constantly place new cards out, taking the actions, replace them with another. That to me is part of the satisfying puzzle of the game, of constantly building up stronger projects, but then knowing that you can also take advantage of the pile of tags you've started to accumulate by placing a new project on top of it, getting more actions than the game otherwise technically wants you to have round over round. There's going to be some rounds where you go ahead and just do 5 actions and call it a day, and there's going to be some rounds where half of your puzzle is, I draw 3 more cards, I play down this card, that lets me draw 9 cards, I get those 9 cards, only with these tags, so I get 3 cards after that, I use those 3 tags, I use my other card over here, which lets me discard a card to draw 3 and keep one of them, and I can do that multiple times for each of the energy tags, not energy tags, these whatever tags they are, I don't actually know all the names, the innovation tags. So you have all these different little puzzles you're doing throughout the game, but it's all based around how you combine your project cards to the best effect, trying to go ahead and build your tableau and help the general balance of the world better than the game is throwing bad things at you. The cards in general, the multi-use aspect, the fact that you're constantly torn between using a card as its own card, as its own project, or to support a project, or to pay for an existing one by discarding it, that multi-use balance, I love it when a game forces you into hard choices, and I frequently feel the hard choices as I play through Daybreak. And then the last stack of cards, because I told you there's even more cards, is the difficulty modification. This is an entire stack of cards giving you different ways to modify the difficulty, either making it easier if you find yourself able to overcome the challenge, or making it harder either on an individual level or on a global level to all the players, just giving you extra things you have to do. This card over here is high aspirations. In order to win, all players must have fewer than 6 communities in crisis, which means you can't just let this blow up, or if it does blow up, you have to reduce it because too many communities in crisis will stop the players from winning. And not only can you adjust the difficulty higher or lower, which is great on its own, because of the nature of the personal cards, you can even do it on a personal level. I can play this game cooperatively with other players, and since I've played it a bunch of times, maybe I add a personal negative card to myself while not doing the same for others. Or possibly if I'm playing with my kids, maybe they get a card that actually helps them, I get a card that hurts me, and the other players get nothing. You can balance around the players, which is a nice twist of the difficulty modifications. Very often it's just based on the game. In this case, you could do it based on the full game, or you could do it based on the individual players. And the sheer variety of these, and theoretically you can add more of them. I don't think the rulebook actually says doing more than one, but in theory, you can add as many as you want until you've achieved the level of balance that adds for the difficulty that you want out of the game. And by the way, this game does all of this with pretty quick setup and teardown. There's really not a lot going on in the game. It's a few decks of cards, the board, which barely has an impact, and then these little containers over here for your tokens. You can get this game set up in, I guess, 5 minutes or less. I haven't timed myself yet, but I feel it's a 5 minutes or less setup for all of this game over here. As far as what I don't like in the game, first of all, coming to the setup aspect, I do think the board is kind of silly. Like, you have this giant board over here, and really this matters, and then these matter in theory, but they could have just been a column on its own. You could have had a board here that was a quarter the size and had all the information. This was a little unnecessary. I'd say the most necessary part is you can thematically move your oceans and your trees to different regions of the board for whatever reason you want, but that just makes counting things up a little harder to see at a glance. So it really just feels like the board is mostly unnecessary in this game. I'll also say that I wish the asymmetric starts of the players felt more asymmetric. There are differences to how each of the nations runs in the game, but I don't think they feel meaningfully different to me. There's small nuanced aspects to it of what they do, but I haven't felt a strong, I guess every time I play this, I've played through all the nations at this point, and I don't know if I care to even think that I have a favorite. They have slight marginal differences to their starting cards and to their starting distribution, and none of them that I actually care about. Which I guess you could say that you could just have 4 players and call it a day, so the slight asymmetry is better than nothing, but I wish there had been more asymmetry, partially because of what this game reminds me of another game that we're going to come to in recommendations that has much greater asymmetry, and I kind of wish this game had that. Although that leads into a larger complaint I have, because the board is unnecessary but not a big deal. The asymmetry, I wish there was more, but again, not a big deal. My main complaint against Daybreak, on frankly the thing that holds it back from being a 5 out of 5 for me, because I do love the cards and the puzzle and the abilities, I love all of that, but the main thing that holds it back from being a 5 out of 5 for me is this game does have a very similar arc as to how it feels playing through it every single time. The main thing that mixes it up, honestly, is the difficulty modifications. Because as much as there's variety in the global projects, as much as there's variety in the forecasting crisis, and as much as there's a pile full of cards that you are weeding your way through to try to find your slight increased puzzle efficiency over the other players, well, not really over the other players, with the other players, despite all of that, it generally follows a very similar arc. You're trying to increase your energy, you're trying to decrease your durability energy, and you're trying to decrease your emissions. The slight nuances of how you get there, that does shift up. Make no mistake, I wouldn't be ranking this game as highly as I am if not for the fact that I do love how well it works together, but every time I play this, I do feel I'm approaching the exact same arc with minimal variability to how it actually plays out. It's more about me trying to find the card combinations that I'm like, ooh, I do a little bit here, I do a little bit there, I got these 3 cards that work together, ooh, look at this project, I haven't utilized this project before, and now I'm going to support it with 4 cards and get something a little better. But it kind of comes down to card draw, reducing emissions, increasing energy, and reducing dirty energy. Those are the 4 principal things you are doing 95% of the time. You're just doing them in different combinations with different things supporting them or discarding and all of that. I do feel the global projects, to be fair, the global projects can feel a little bit different, as well as the bad things, the crises as well, for that matter. But nonetheless, it usually comes down to the same general pattern that by the amount of times I've played this game by now, it has that similarity that I feel game to game has become more apparent the more often I play this. As far as things that I can see others not liking, first of all, the basically multiplayer solitaire. This game is effectively you doing your own thing with minimal reasons to interact with the other players. Sure, you have to vote on the global projects. Maybe you disagree. That might be the most exciting thing that happens all game. Sometimes you can pass things to other players, a card, some energy. There are things you could do, but they're so minimal in the level of engagement that this is effectively multiplayer solitaire with the occasional thing happening that reminds you that there are other players at the table. And that doesn't bother me. I still enjoy the puzzle I'm playing, but it certainly might be something that takes away from the experience for yourself. Also, luck of the draw is definitely present. There are times, like for example, like looking at this card, Nuclear R&D. Draw 9 cards and then keep all cards that have a nuclear tag or an innovation tag. That's great. And sometimes you'll play it and draw 5 cards. 5 is actually, I don't think I've ever drawn 5. And there's a lot of cards that do that, by the way, that drawing 9 cards with certain tags. But I'd say a good hand, sometimes you can get like 4 cards out of it. Maybe 4 cards, that's great. 4 cards from a single action that you didn't even have to support. That's incredible. Other times you draw 0, and you can have a bunch of 0 draws in a row or a bunch of multiple card draws. And so that kind of luck of the draw certainly can be a factor in this game. And that's true for the rolling dice. If you go ahead and your first 2 rolls of the game are advancing Lost of Arctic Sea and advancing Permafrost, that's going to be a significantly worse start than if you have 2 over here and nothing bad happened until later. Because the later the game goes on, the more equipped you are to deal with the bad things, but if they happen early on, you are in trouble. And so the game definitely has luck of the dice and luck of the draw that can certainly impact whether you have a game that you can manage everything being thrown at you, or whether it all falls apart and you die on round 2. Yes, by the way, I have died in round 2 once. I'm not proud of it, but I blame the luck of the game. Anyways, outside of that, the other thing I'd say is tracking card abilities is the last kind of critique that you might want to be aware of, where effectively you are trying to utilize all these cards, and you can only activate each card equal to the number of times. Well, I guess, let me rephrase that. You can activate some cards as many times as you want if there's no limit. Other cards do have a limit, and if you have a bunch of cards with a limit, trying to track what you have and haven't activated can quickly become a little problematic. It's not a big deal, but certainly it can be a little overwhelming trying to track all the things happening, and the game just says, hey, use some cubes to put on the cards. It functionally works. Again, it's not a big deal. This is why it's in what I can see others not liking, but the tracking of all the stuff you've done can be a small issue for you. As far as final thoughts on Daybreak, I really like this game. I really like the card combinations. I really like the sheer card variety. I like the difficulty modifications. I've had a lot of fun constantly building my engine and trying to overpower and building my tableau and get a little bit more energy here and adjust my energy there and add these tags over here so that I'm getting a stronger card draw. All of that is very, very, very fun and very satisfying. The only thing that holds this game back from me in a meaningful sense, past just complaining on small levels, is that aspect I talked about where the more I've played through this game, the more it does feel like the arc is somewhat similar. In a way that, like, for example, this is actually designed by Matt Leacock, who's done Pandemic. I think Pandemic often feels more different because even just the way things spread out on the board produces a drastically different puzzle. The fact that there's no board here in any meaningful sense does mean that it's all more abstracted in a way that does have the same kind of structure feeling more similar in here as it might in something like Pandemic. And that's the main thing that holds it back for me. Despite that, I am coming in at a 4.5 out of 5, at least for right now. I do see the possibility of that dropping to a 4 the more I continue to play through it. For right now, I have the core puzzle that I really love, the part where it feels a little repetitive that holds it back for me, but there's enough going on here that it's still a 4.5 for now. I could see it dropping over time, but my ratings are always at least where things are right now, so a 4.5 out of 5. As far as other game recommendations, definitely check out The Loop from Pandasaurus Games. To me, it's one of my favorite cooperative games. I often say that it's my favorite cooperative game since Pandemic. If you're looking for a pure, on-the-board management of disaster, that kind of engine, I love The Loop and definitely recommend checking it out. And if you're looking for another cooperative game that this to me felt very reminiscent of, Spirit Island very much has the same kind of puzzle where you have these asymmetric spirits with their different starts, and then you keep adding cards and abilities as you constantly feel overwhelmed, but have to slowly power your way way through everything bad being thrown at you. I very much enjoy that one, and definitely recommend checking out that if you're ready to level up the experience you're having from Daybreak into something a bit more chaotic, a bit more thematic, and very overwhelmingly powerful. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.